There were some sad moments today at the happiest place on earth. We'll explain why on News at 10 right after the movie.
Disneyland is ready to say goodbye, but the guests and the cast members aren't ready to say the same. But cost-cutting Disneyland middle management couldn't wait to turn the wrench and bring Walt Disney's dream to an end.
After 38 years and millions of passengers, the Alpine theme ride is closing.
But why did Disneyland close one of the most unique rides after nearly 4 decades? Well, one of the reasons, according to Disneyland, was its lack of popularity.
Most kids think the 3.5-minute ride from Fantasyland to Tomorrowland is just too long.
I wish they never closed this ride down. Oh, it was fun, and I liked it.
While others blamed its safety. But of course, no one ever gets hurt at Disneyland.
Why say goodbye? Some people think it's because you've had some mishaps on it. One person fell earlier this year. Is that the reason?
Not at all. No, we've had over 150 million people ride the Skyway without any mishap.
The public, he says, wants high tech instead.
The people demand high tech, like the rocket rods and light magic, 2 epic failures that would follow that wouldn't last a combined 10% of the time that the Disneyland Skyway flew across the skies, but would cost beyond $50 million more and require way more than 10 cast members, which is ultimately where this is going. But before we talk about the 10 cast members, let's talk about one, a beloved cast member who talks to the news, and later is tasked to push the button that would end a Disneyland legacy.
All right, watch it now.
Not Ernie Burns. He's been working the ride for 24 years.
I'm very sad about it closing because I'm going to miss it.
While management can't wait to remove a ride that 30 years later, Disney still hasn't replaced. But friends, wait until you hear the shocking real reason Disneyland cut the cable on the Disneyland Skyway and removed Disneyland's only ride in the sky forever. Brickey here, looking back into Disneyland's past to break down one of Disneyland's biggest mistakes, giving up on the Disneyland Skyway. 1956 was an important year for Disneyland. Opening its gates on July 17, 1955, Disneyland had already become a beloved destination for families, yet the park was still in its infancy, constantly evolving and expanding. Walt Disney faced the challenge of trying to fix what wasn't working and quickly adding attractions to absorb the fast-growing crowds. In early '56, significant changes were beginning to take place. The pack mules, stagecoaches, and Conestoga wagons were closed to make room for new additions. In March of '56 saw the introduction of the Astrojets in Tomorrowland. It was a small step in a much larger expansion, but by June, Disneyland was ready for its first full summer season with several new attractions. For the first time, guests could visit Tom Sawyer Island in Frontierland, and the Storybook Land canal boats finally had the story added to them in Fantasyland. And the following month of July, Disneyland continued its rapid expansion with the opening of 3 more attractions: the Mine Train and the Indian War Canoes in Frontierland and the Junior Utopia in Fantasyland. This wave of new attractions highlighted Disneyland's commitment to growth and innovation. Setting the stage early, the guests should always anticipate something new happening at Disneyland. But among all these new attractions, there was one that stood out and would become an iconic part of Disneyland's rich history. This attraction wasn't just a ride, it was a groundbreaking innovation that provided guests with a unique perspective of Walt's park, aligning with Walt's vision for the future. Unlike the other attractions in the class of '56, this attraction would not be limited to just one land and would pick up where the Disneyland Railroad had left off. It was more than just a method of transportation. It offered guests a unique aerial perspective of Disneyland, similar to how the steam trains circled the park, and like the trains, this attraction helped guests navigate themselves within Disneyland's twisting and turning footprint, providing an unobstructed preview of your day at Disneyland, and provided unique perspectives for photography in the quickly emerging home video. It became one of the most photographed attractions of Disneyland's early years. And this attraction would be known as the Disneyland Skyway. In 1956, Walt Disney was not just focused on expanding Disneyland, he was envisioning the future of transportation and how it could enhance both society and his beloved theme park. Walt's fascination with transportation systems was evident, believing that easy access to various destinations would foster social growth, boost the economy, and enrich creativity and culture. The gently used Skyway system, a 1947 Von Roll prototype, was a purchase Walt made even before he knew where he would place it inside of Disneyland, proving sometimes you just know it when you see it. Illustrating his forward-thinking mindset, Imagineer John Hench was tasked to collaborate with engineers from Von Roll, a Swiss company known for their cable car systems, and manufacturer of the Disneyland Skyway. Walt saw the Skyway as more than just an amusement ride. He referred to it as a transportation system of the future. He could envision it for use in parking lots and huge shopping centers to come. The Skyway's official opening took place on June 21st, 1956, in a ceremony held at the Fantasyland Swiss Chalet, which was decorated like an alpine garden. Walt Disney, alongside Dr. Walter Schmid, the Swiss Consul General of Los Angeles, rode the first bucket to inaugurate the attraction. The Skyway was a highly visible new attraction cable car connecting Tomorrowland and Fantasyland. These round gondolas seated 2 passengers were open to the elements and traveled along an overhead cable that was supported by 4 T-shaped towers, the tallest of which stood 60 feet high atop Holiday Hill. The dramatic views and unique experience made the ride immensely popular, leading quickly to the elimination of the initial round-trip option. Instead, every ride became a one-way journey for a single D ticket. Although the Skyway was an off-the-shelf ride from Von Roll, it was the first installation of this type of gondola system in the United States, and one of few in the world, making it a truly unique experience for Disneyland guests. Walt's decision to incorporate the Skyway into Disneyland was a stroke of genius. It hinted at his grand vision of Epcot, where transportation systems would seamlessly integrate with a functioning, innovative city. The Skyway captured Disneyland's design philosophy, creating visual stacking of sightlines and creating kinetic energy that made the park unique during the 1950s and into the late 60s. By blending transportation and entertainment, Walt Disney had blurred the lines between practical utility and imaginative experiences. Walt Disney was paving the way for future innovations in both theme park and urban design. Now that we know the Disneyland Skyway, a unique place in Disney's history, and how it was a part of Walt's vision, let's break down this attraction's unique design. The system used approximately 1,200 feet of cable to connect the 2 lands. The ride operated at a speed of 4 to 6 miles per hour, allowing guests to feel like they were floating above the 2 areas, but basically going the same speed as the pedestrians below. Each one-way trip took just over 3 minutes, with gondolas being dispatched approximately every 9 seconds. The cable is in constant movement. Once guests are seated, they are then placed on the cable and take off, creating constant movement for its passengers and constant kinetic energy for guests observing from below. And if you're trying to imagine just how high the Skyway was in the air, the Skyway Tower was 1 foot taller than the top mast of sailing ship Columbia. And ironically, both attractions cost the same amount of money, $300,000. The original gondolas were designed by Imagineer Dick Stein. They were round and made of spun metal, each seating 2 guests, on fiberglass patio chairs bolted on the floor with a center pole. The center pole made it extremely awkward for passengers as it went right down the middle of the bucket. These original metal buckets would last for 9 years, but in '65, for Disneyland's tencennial celebration, Bob Gurr redesigned the gondolas with the goal of doubling the capacity, but without increasing the weight. The iconic new square-shaped gondolas were made of lightweight ABS plastic that had a steel frame that was encased around it, and the steel frame was attached to the ride system, Therefore, Bob Gurr had eliminated the center bar and doubled the capacity, all while keeping the ride inside of its weight requirements. And friends, that's what Bob Gurr maybe did best: creative problem solving, all while designing within restraint. Adding safety, higher capacity, all encased inside of an iconic design that is easily recognizable and uniquely Disneyland. The original towers would be replaced in 1983 when New Fantasyland would show up, and this was at the urging of Von Rohe Tramways. Consider this foreshadowing for what's to come when the Matterhorn shows up. The Fantasyland station was a beautifully decorated Swiss chalet. It resembled an alpine garden. This was the operational hub for the Skyway, where it housed the drive system. The station's design added to the charm and immersive experience of the attraction, making it a memorable part of the ride, with the layering topography below and landscaping made this stop feel as if you had traveled from the future to the Swiss Alps. And with all of its trees, you felt like you had escaped to the mountains. During the new Fantasyland construction, the Fantasyland station was closed, but smart guests figured out they could ride the Skyway round trip to get a view of the construction site and monitor the progress. The Tomorrowland station, though modest in its modern architecture, played a crucial role in the Skyway's operation. It housed the 35,000 pounds of ballast to keep the cables properly taut. This station, while functional, also contributed to the overall experience of the ride, making the end of the journey with its own unique charm. Its mid-century design with modern typography and its famous rotating signs was the complete opposite of the tranquil station you had just left behind. It created an experience of traveling into a city of the future as compared to where your journey had just begun in the rolling hills of Fantasyland. Okay, so now you know where the idea from the Skyway came from and how it works. But to give you the full breakdown on how a pile of dirt would inspire the Skyway and how the Skyway would in turn inspire a mountain, we have to go back in our story to 1955. This is where the story of Holiday Hill begins, leading to one of Disneyland's most iconic features, the Matterhorn, which outlived the Skyway but wouldn't be here today without its old roommate. Walt Disney's vision for Disneyland was always evolving, and the Skyway ride was no exception. Let's quickly rewind to trace Walt's problem and solutions to create two of Disneyland's icons. Walt's first problem: what do you do with all the dirt cleared out from Sleeping Beauty Castle? When Sleeping Beauty Castle was built, it left behind a massive amount of dirt. What to do with it? The solution was to create Holiday Hill, a pile of dirt between Tomorrowland and Fantasyland, where Bill Evans and his landscaping team transformed this mound of dirt into an inviting park by planting shrubs and small trees and creating paths leading to the top, where according to Rolly Crump, somewhere on Holiday Hill there were even marijuana plants that had been planted. This hill played a crucial role in the early days of Disneyland, offering a raised vantage point for the guests and creating a visual barrier between fantasy and Walt's vision of the future. But Holiday Hill brings us to our next problem. As Disneyland continued to expand, Walt envisioned the Skyway. However, Holiday Hill stood in the way of where the track would make the most sense. But the solution also made a lot of sense. They placed one of the 4 Skyway towers at the top of Holiday Hill. The 20-foot height of the hill raised the cable car tower to a dramatic altitude, improving riders' view while integrating the attraction into the existing landscaping. But this takes us to our next problem, where Walt loved the Skyway, but he hated Holiday Hill. Despite the functional use of the hill, Walt Disney was not satisfied with it. He saw it as an eyesore and wanted something grander. Walt famously once said, "Disneyland is like a piece of clay. If there's something I don't like, I'm not stuck with it. I can reshape it and revamp." His solution was to ambitiously replace Holiday Hill with a mountain. Walt wanted a real mountain, or rather an artificial facsimile of a real mountain, inspired by the Matterhorn. Walt's vision was to hide the Skyway Tower inside of this man-made mountain, which created another problem. The Matterhorn was to replace Holiday Hill. This would present a massive design challenge, building the mountain around the Skyway's main support tower. The construction process was complicated by the Skyway. They had to remove the original Skyway support tower and hold the cable in the exact same spot to avoid changing the cable layout. The solution was to incorporate the Skyway into the mountain itself. Walt asked his Imagineers to design a tunnel through the top of the mountain for the buckets to pass through. This design meant that the Matterhorn would replace the existing cable car tower seamlessly, integrating the Skyway into the new roller coaster attraction. But this again creates another major problem. How do you design a ride inside of a mountain that tapers from the top down to the bottom, and you're not allowed to use the center of the mountain because it has a giant beam going through the direct center of it for the Skyway? Well, the solution was revolutionary: to create the world's first tubular steel roller coaster. This design allowed for tight turns and bends, enabling the roller coaster to race around the outer edge of the mountain, avoiding the center where the Skyway tower was placed. Bob Gurr said, "I had to go over the top of the Skyway, make a quick turn, go under the path of the buckets, but adding to the complexity because the mountain is tapering." Bob Gurr said luckily he could see in 3D and could visualize spatial relationships. The ride had to have a high ridership capacity, it had to be safe, and it also had to be fun. The roller coaster would travel in and around a replica of a real mountain, and the Skyway ride would have to pass through the middle. But all of this falls under Disneyland's biggest problem of them all. But it's also, in my opinion, the thing that has consistently made Disneyland so special. Disneyland is small. Disneyland's limited space has always posed its biggest challenges, but Walt saw this as an opportunity for innovation. The solution was to stack attractions, saving space and adding to the kinetic energy that made Disneyland so special. In 1959, with the building of the Matterhorn, the gondolas went back and forth through the glacial grotto via two openings in this man-made mountain. At 147 feet, it would be the highest structure in Orange County for decades. The integration of the Matterhorn and the Skyway exemplified this approach, creating a dynamic, multi-layered experience for Disneyland guests. Walt's vision and attention to detail culminated in the Matterhorn, which became a beloved Disneyland landmark. This transition not only solved the problem of the unsightly tower, but it also showcased Walt Disney's ability to turn challenges into iconic elements inside of the park. Just prior to opening, Joe Fowler told Walt, "I think we'll have it finished on time, but next time, when we have to build a mountain, let's let God do it." This remark encapsulates the complexity and ambition behind the project, highlighting the incredible effort and ingenuity required to bring Walt's vision to life. It's the final night of operation. The ride is still circulating, taking its final laps around the skies of Disneyland, something that will never be done again. And they are already plotting how to properly cut the cable to dismantle one of Walt Disney's dreams as quickly as possible.
And we want to get these two spring pieces here. Just on each side, you see those springs? Yeah, we got to get them taken down and get our springs to get up. The other thing is, when we stop the cable, I want to make sure we stop the old splice somewhere over on that end.
Let's break down all the lies and excuses that were created to justify the closing of a Disneyland landmark. And ultimately, I will give you my opinion on why Disney made one of the biggest mistakes ever, choosing short-term gains over long-term vision. One persistent myth is that the Skyway closed because someone fell out and died. This is false. In April of 1994, the same year the attraction closed, a man named Randall Charles fell approximately 20 feet from one of the gondolas and filed a negligence lawsuit against Disney. It was later proven that he had jumped on purpose, hoping to scam Disneyland out of a bogus settlement. In fact, nobody died from falling out of the Skyway ever. An estimated 150 million guests would ride on the Disneyland Skyway, and only one would ever fall out, and that one did it on purpose. That's a pretty good track record for safety. And sure, Disney could claim that changes in society and changes in societal behavior would make it dangerous to have guests floating above other guests. But quick edits to the vehicles would put guests inside of an area where they could no longer do anything to the guests below. Things like what Blossom and her friend were guilty of doing.
Remember when we used to throw ice on people from up here?
But I guess because of Blossom, we can't have nice things. Mickey and Minnie will be the last to ride, but beforehand, Disneyland will get the perfect photo to capture the magic of this moment. Not caring that it won't be a blue car that will actually make the final flight over Disneyland. One major reason cited for the closure was the cost of operating the Skyway. Despite requiring minimal staff, the newly opened Indiana Jones and the Temple of Forbidden Eye demanded many more employees. Tony Baxter suggested that the closure was about saving money. He said, part of the dilemma with the Skyway was the cost of operating the park overall. Every time you add a new attraction like Indiana Jones, the cost of operating the park becomes more expensive. The result is the prevailing attitude that when something new opens up, something old should come down to offset the cost. However, this middle management logic can be challenged. Maintaining the Skyway would have been cheaper than building any new attractions in the future. Even if they had to replace the support beam that was inside of the Matterhorn that was rumored to be deteriorating, the cost would have been far less than constructing a new attraction. The Skyway occupied minimal valuable Disneyland real estate, and it had a high capacity. Loading up to 4 guests every 9 seconds totals a potential of 3,000 guests per hour, and did all of this only requiring 10 cast members. But someone in middle management thought that those 10 employees should be moved over to Indiana Jones and in return shut down an entire attraction. This is the type of middle management decision making that absolutely drives me nuts and makes me hate people that hate creativity, with the mindset that it's easier just to give up and to save the money instead of finding a creative long-term solution for a very short-term financial problem. By the look of all these signatures, this ride sure seems to be loved by the Disneyland cast members. Too bad 10 cast members is 10 too many to keep this 4-decade icon still floating in the sky. The park also blamed recent laws for making improvements financially infeasible. The Skyway was not accessible to those using wheelchairs and no longer met the safety codes for aerial tramways. The Fantasyland station did have 23 stairs up to the loading platform, making it difficult to add a practical ramp for guests who couldn't walk up those stairs. However, this is where I push back. The Tomorrowland station, essentially just a big floating stage, could have easily had an elevator attached similar to the rocket jet's NASA-inspired lift. This would allow wheelchair guests to board the Skyway in Tomorrowland for a round trip, similar to how they can access the Disneyland Railroad from certain stops. Imagineers considered updating the Skyway with a larger enclosed, air-conditioned, and heated 6-person gondola. These new gondolas would travel faster and the new cable would go around the Matterhorn. There were even consideration for a 3rd station in Critter Country. Oh, do I love the idea of this. These modifications sound remarkably similar to Walt Disney World's Skyliner that opened up in 2019, proving that at Disney, good ideas never die. And this also illustrates that creative people have the willingness to solve problems, whereas management just said, no, it's too expensive. We need to take 10 people someplace else. But possibly the biggest lie of them all, guests didn't like the attraction. Some park officials suggested that the declining popularity led to the Skyway's closure. However, this excuse is weak. The Skyway was a photogenic attraction that would have thrived in the era of social media. Its unique views and nostalgic charm would have made it a favorite among the FOMO generation. If fans didn't like it, why does Disney still sell merchandise to celebrate it? Maybe in the lull of the 90s, this attraction was on a downtick, but if they would have stayed committed to Walt's vision, this today would be one of the most popular attractions in all of Disneyland. But you know what? Maybe it was about the money. Despite these considerations, the abandoned Swiss Chalet sat unused for over 20 years, hidden by the trees near Casey Jr. There were at some point plans that turned the Fantasyland station into a dining area or a meet and greet, but it never materialized. Eventually, the chalet was demolished in 2016, to make way for Star Wars Galaxy's Edge. The demolition cost $67,000, highlighting the misplaced priorities in the decision to remove the Skyway. The Disneyland Skyway closed on November 9th, 1994, after 38 years of operation. Management quickly removed the support towers, and the passageway through the Matterhorn was sealed. The cost of 10 cast members or an elevator with a few modified Skyway cars was just too much for Disneyland management to bear. And this decision boiled down to middle management prioritizing extreme cost cutting over preserving Walt Disney's vision and the guest experience, making this one of the cheapest and worst decisions Disney has ever made in the history of Disneyland. Ernie is looking nervous. He knows that the ride of a lifetime is quickly coming to an end. And now it's time to say goodbye for petty reasons. But it's more of a give up than it is a goodbye, as Mickey and Minnie will be the final guests to ever fly on the Tomorrowland Skyway. And after 2 decades of working on an attraction that he loves, it's time for Ernie to hit the kill switch. 38 years has come to an end. And just like that, the wheels of Walt Disney's progress stop. But don't worry about your emotions. Can you act like you're pushing the button just one more time for the perfect photo? The only thing that turns is a wrench that brings this ride to its end. And since then, no guest has ever been able to look down into Fantasyland, fly like Tinkerbell behind Sleeping Beauty Castle, or pierce the alpine peak of the mighty Matterhorn. 10 cast members was 10 too many, and 10 years too short from this attraction proving Walt Disney right and middle management wrong. Today, all that remains are a few relics, like the 1959 Skyway bucket inside of the Matterhorn, serving as a reminder of one of Disneyland's most beloved attractions that was lost due to short-sighted decisions. Friends, if you'd like to learn more about the Matterhorn, make sure you watch this video right here and go ahead and hit subscribe if you enjoyed today's video.